Imagine this scenario of an Omega so broken, so discarded, that even the lowest warriors laughed when she walked past. They called her worthless and weak. But on the night of the blood moon, when 12 of the Alpha King's finest fighters surrounded her in the training grounds, something inside her snapped. 10 minutes later, all 12 lay unconscious in the dirt. The Alpha King watched from his balcony, and for the first time in 300 years, he smiled. Because he'd just found exactly what he needed. Not a mate. Not a servant, but as a weapon. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The scent of rotting leaves mixed with morning dew as Brienne knelt in the mud, scrubbing the training ground floors with hands already raw and bleeding. 5 years. 5 years since her parents died defending the northern border, and this was her inheritance. Omega work. The lowest rank. The forgotten ones. Move faster, waste of space. The command came from Gareth, one of the king's personal guards, as he stepped deliberately through the section she'd just cleaned, leaving fresh boot prints across the stone. She didn't look up. Learned that lesson 3 winters ago when looking a ranked wolf in the eye earned her 2 broken ribs. Yes, warrior, she whispered. He laughed, that cruel sound she'd grown accustomed to, and moved on. Around her, the Shadowcrest Pack compound buzzed with activity. Warriors trained in the eastern yards. Hunters prepared for the evening hunt. The betas managed territory disputes in the Great Hall. And Omegas like her scrubbed, cleaned, served, and disappeared. Brienne's wolf stirred restlessly inside her, that constant presence she'd learned to suppress. Her wolf didn't understand hierarchy. Didn't understand why they had to bow and scrape when everything in their blood screamed to fight back. Patience, she told her wolf. Just patience. Brienne. The sharp voice belonged to Madra, the Omega house mistress. The king's chambers need attending. Now. Her heart seized. The king's chambers. Alpha King Sulien himself. In 5 years, she'd never been assigned anywhere near his private quarters. Omegas who went there either came back different or didn't come back at all. Mistress, perhaps someone more experienced. Did I ask for your opinion? Madra's eyes flashed yellow, her wolf pressing forward in warning. Move. Before I report your insolence. Brienne gathered her cleaning supplies with shaking hands and made her way through the compound's twisting corridors. The architecture here was ancient, carved from mountain stone by the first packs who'd settled these lands over 1,000 years ago. Every pillar told a story. Every archway bore the marks of claws from battles long past. She climbed the eastern tower stairs, each step making her wolf more agitated. By the time she reached the king's floor, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the bucket. The guards at his door barely glanced at her. To them, she was furniture. Invisible. The chambers were empty when she entered, and she released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Work quickly. Get out. Disappear. She'd just begun dusting the massive bookshelves when she heard it. Voices from the adjoining war room. The door stood slightly ajar. Your Majesty, the Southern Packs are forming an alliance. That was Auric, the king's chief strategist. If they unite under Morgatha's banner, we'll be facing a force 3 times our size. Let them come. The king's voice was like gravel and smoke, ancient and cold. We've held this territory for 3 centuries. We'll hold it for 3 more. My king, with respect, our warriors are strong, but Morgoth has been recruiting. Rogues, mercenaries, even some of the Western Pack defectors. They fight without honor, without rules. A long pause. Then we'll need someone who can fight the same way. Brienne froze, cloth still in her hand. She shouldn't be hearing this. If they discovered her, someone expendable, the king continued. Someone we can mold. Someone with nothing to lose. An Omega? Auric sounded skeptical. Not just any Omega. Papers rustled. There was a report last year. One of them injured a beta during a disciplinary incident. The report was buried, but I remember. Her blood turned to ice. That incident. The beta who'd cornered her in the storage cellar, hands grabbing, breath reeking of blood wine. Her wolf had surged forward before she could stop it, and she'd thrown him across the room with strength that shouldn't have been possible. She'd thought they'd forgotten. thought it had been swept away as a drunken beta's embarrassment. You want to weaponize an Omega? Auric asked. My king, they're weak by nature. The Omega gene is a lie. The king's words cut through the room like a blade. A convenient story we tell to maintain order. But I've lived long enough to know the truth. Omegas aren't weak. They're suppressed. Centuries of conditioning, of breaking them down, of making them believe they're nothing. But break that conditioning, release what's underneath. Footsteps. Coming toward the door. Brienne moved with pure instinct, scrambling behind a massive tapestry just as the king emerged from the war room. Through the tiny gap in the fabric, she watched him cross to his desk. Alpha King Sulien was enormous, even by Alpha standards. Scars covered his arms, each one a story of battles won. His hair, dark as midnight, hung to his shoulders. His eyes, when they flickered to wolf yellow, held an intelligence that made her wolf whimper. He was 400 years old, some said. Maybe older. A king who'd seen empires rise and fall. Auric, he called back into the war room. Find her. The Omega from the report. Brienne Ashfeld. Bring her to me tomorrow at dawn. The world tilted. And Auric? Tell no one. If this works, it'll change everything we know about pack structure. If it fails... He smiled without humor. One less mouth to feed. Brienne waited until she heard the war room door close, then waited another 5 minutes, heart hammering so hard she was certain they'd hear it. When she finally emerged from behind the tapestry, her legs nearly gave out. She stumbled through her remaining duties in a daze. Scrubbed floors without seeing them. Carried linens without knowing where she walked. Her mind raced in circles, chasing the same impossible thoughts. The king wanted her. Knew her name. Planned to, what? Turn her into a weapon? Use her against Morgatha's forces? That night, lying on her thin sleeping mat in the Omega quarters, she stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of it. Around her, 20 other Omegas slept fitfully, their quiet whimpers a familiar soundtrack. These were her people. The forgotten. The broken. Her wolf paced inside her mind, agitated and eager in equal measure. What if he's right? Her wolf whispered. What if we're not weak? We are what we are, Brienne murmured into the darkness. Are we? Or are we what they made us? The question kept her awake until the first rays of dawn crept through the narrow windows. She rose before the wake-up bells, washed her face in cold water, and tried to calm the trembling in her hands. At precisely dawn, Auric appeared at the Omega quarters. His expression gave nothing away. Brienne Ashfeld. Come with me. Every Omega in the room stared as she stood. Madra's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed. Nothing good came from being summoned by name. The walk through the compound felt like a death march. Warriors training in the yards paused to watch. Betas whispered behind their hands. By the time they reached the king's private training ground, a secluded courtyard behind the eastern tower, Brienne's wolf had gone completely silent. Alpha King Sulien stood in the center of the courtyard, arms crossed, watching her approach with those ancient eyes. 12 of his personal fighters ringed the space, the best warriors in the pack. She recognized Gareth among them, his expression promising pain. Leave us, the king said to Auric. My king, are you certain? Leave us. Auric bowed and departed, though his reluctance showed in every step. The king studied her for a long moment. Brienne kept her eyes down, every instinct screaming submission, but her wolf growled low, fighting against the conditioning. Do you know why you're here? He asked. No, Alpha King. Look at me. It went against every rule, every lesson beaten into her since childhood. But she raised her eyes and met his gaze. Yellow met gold, Alpha met Omega, and something sparked in the air between them. Better, he said softly. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want the truth. Can you do that? Yes, Alpha King. When that beta cornered you in the cellar last year, what did you feel? Her breath caught. Fear, Alpha King. After the fear, when you threw him, what did you feel then? The memory surged back. The beta's body hitting the wall. The shocked look on his face. The moment of pure, crystalline clarity when her wolf had been completely, utterly free. "Power," she whispered. "I felt power." The king smiled, and it transformed his face entirely. "Good. That's what I thought." He gestured to his 12 fighters. "These are my best warriors. Each one has killed more enemies than you've seen winters. Each one could tear apart 3 normal wolves without breaking stride." Her confusion must have shown because he continued, "I'm going to give you a choice, Brienne Ashfeld. A choice no Omega has been offered in 500 years. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the pine and steel scent of him. "You can go back to scrubbing floors and breaking your back for a pack that sees you as nothing. Or," his eyes glowed pure gold now, "you can fight. Right here. Right now. Against all 12 of them. My king, I'm an Omega. I can't. Don't tell me what you can't do." His voice turned hard. "I watched you from my balcony during the last full moon. Watched you hold a water bucket steady while 3 betas knocked into you accidentally. Watched your wolf fighting to get out, fighting against every chain you've wrapped around it. You're not weak. You're caged. If I fight them, they'll kill me. Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll surprise us both." He walked to the edge of the courtyard, then turned back. "But understand this. If you walk away now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. Wondering what you could have been. Wondering if I was right." The 12 fighters moved into position, forming a loose circle around her. Gareth cracked his knuckles, grinning. "My king," one of the warriors called out. "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "This is madness. She's an Omega. Even if she wanted to fight, her wolf won't." "Her wolf will do exactly what it was born to do," the king interrupted. "If she lets it." Brienne's mind spun. This was suicide. 12 trained warriors against 1 Omega who'd never thrown a real punch in her life. But somewhere deep inside, in the place where her wolf lived, something ancient stirred. Something that remembered a time before ranks, before hierarchy, before Omegas were taught to bow. Her parents had been warriors. Both of them. They'd died with honor, defending pack land. She'd been 12 when the news came. 12 when the pack decided a warrior's daughter without warrior blood was better suited to scrubbing floors. What would they think if they could see her now? "I'll fight," she heard herself say. The courtyard went still. "What was that?" the king asked, though the gleam in his eyes said he'd heard perfectly well. Brienne raised her voice, let her wolf color it for the first time in 5 years. "I said I'll fight, Alpha King." "Then fight." The first warrior lunged before she'd finished processing the command. Pure instinct made her dodge, muscle memory from watching warriors train for years guiding her movements. His claws whistled past her face, close enough to feel the wind. 2 more came from her left. She dropped low, swept a leg out, felt it connect with someone's ankle. A grunt of pain. First blood to her. But then they were everywhere. Fists. Close. The metallic scent of blood, hers and theirs. Pain exploded across her ribs as someone's boot connected. She hit the ground hard, tasted copper and dirt. "Get up," her wolf snarled. "Get up or die here." She rolled, came to her feet, and felt something shift. The chains she'd wrapped around her wolf, the careful control she'd maintained for 5 years, began to crack. One of the warriors grabbed her from behind, arms like iron bands around her chest. She threw her head back, heard the crunch of his nose breaking, felt his grip loosen. Spun and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. He went down. The others hesitated, just for a second, and in that second, Brienne felt the last chain snap. Her wolf surged forward, not fully shifting but flooding her with strength she'd never known she possessed. The world sharpened. Every heartbeat, every breath, every tiny movement telegraphed what her opponents would do next. She moved like water, like wind, like something wild and unchained. Ducked under a punch and drove her fist into an exposed kidney. Caught an incoming kick and twisted, sending the warrior sprawling. Blood sang in her veins, hot and fierce. Gareth came at her with a roar, fully shifted into his massive warrior form. She should have been terrified. Should have submitted. Instead, her lips pulled back from her teeth in a feral grin. He lunged. She sidestepped, grabbed his foreleg as he passed, and used his own momentum to slam him into the courtyard wall. Stone cracked. Gareth slumped. The remaining warriors attacked together, coordinated and desperate. She was smaller, faster, and for the first time in her life, completely free. Every blow she'd absorbed over 5 years fueled her now. Every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment of forced submission transformed into pure, burning rage. When the last warrior fell, Brienne stood in the center of the courtyard, chest heaving, covered in blood and bruises, alive in a way she'd never been before. The king descended from his observation point slowly, deliberately. His expression was unreadable. 12 of my best, he said quietly. 12 warriors who've served me for decades. Unconscious in less than 10 minutes. He walked a slow circle around her. Do you know what you are, Brienne Ashfeld? She couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. You're proof, he continued. Proof that everything we've been told about Omegas is a carefully constructed lie. Proof that the greatest weapon isn't always the strongest or the fastest, but the most underestimated. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Morgatha's forces will come with overwhelming numbers. Traditional warriors, no matter how skilled, will eventually fall to sheer volume. But you... His smile was sharp as a blade. You're something they won't see coming. Something they can't prepare for. An Omega who fights like fury incarnate. What do you want from me? Her voice came out raw. I want you to become my weapon. I want you to train harder than these warriors ever dreamed. I want you to learn every way to kill, to maim, to terrify. And when Morgatha's forces come... He leaned in close, his words a whisper meant only for her. I want you to remind them why they should fear the dark. Brienne's wolf howled in triumph, in recognition, in savage joy. And if I refuse? You won't. He said it with absolute certainty. Because for the first time in 5 years, you feel alive. For the first time since your parents died, you feel like their daughter. Like a warrior. Tears burned behind her eyes, hot and unexpected. He was right. Standing here, blood on her hands and fire in her veins, she felt like she'd finally come home. What happens now? She asked. Now. The king turned toward the tower. Now you learn what it truly means to be a weapon. And Brienne. He glanced back over his shoulder. Everything you thought you knew about pack law, about hierarchy, about what's possible? Forget it. Because I'm about to show you a world where Omegas don't bow. As she followed him from the courtyard, stepping over the groaning bodies of fallen warriors, one thought burned clear in her mind. If the king thought he could control her, shape her, use her as his perfect weapon, he was about to learn something crucial. The same chains that had bound her had also forged her. And a weapon sharp enough to cut enemies could cut its master just as easily. But that was a problem for another day. For now, she had training to survive, a war to prepare for, and 12 unconscious warriors who would wake up knowing that the weakest Omega in the pack had destroyed them all. The question was no longer whether she could fight. The question was, once she became the weapon the king wanted, who would she choose to aim at? The room they gave her was nothing like the Omega quarters. Stone walls instead of rotting wood. A real bed with thick furs. A window that looked out over the northern mountains. Brienne stood in the center of it, still covered in blood and bruises, and wondered if this was some elaborate dream. You have 1 hour to clean yourself and eat, Oryx said from the doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, but she caught the wariness in his eyes. News traveled fast. By now, the entire compound probably knew what had happened in the courtyard. Then training begins. What kind of training? The kind that will either make you the most dangerous wolf in the kingdom. He paused, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. Or kill you. The king doesn't believe in half measures. After he left, Brienne stripped off her ruined clothes and stepped into the bathing room. Hot water. When was the last time she'd had hot water? She sank into the copper tub and watched the water turn pink, then red, as blood sluiced from her skin. Her body was a map of damage. Bruises blooming across her ribs. Split knuckles. A deep cut along her shoulder where someone's claws had connected. But underneath the pain, Energy thrummed through her veins like lightning. Her wolf paced contentedly, no longer fighting against invisible chains. "We did it," her wolf murmured. "We're free." "Are we?" Brienne asked the empty room. "Or did we just trade one cage for another?" No answer came. She dressed in the clothes left for her. Simple leather pants and a tunic, but fitted properly, made for movement. Warrior clothes. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, like wearing someone else's identity. The meal waiting in her room could have fed 3 omegas for a week. Roasted meat, fresh bread, cheese, fruits she'd only ever served to higher ranks. Her stomach growled, reminding her she'd eaten nothing but scraps yesterday. She forced herself to eat slowly, though her wolf wanted to tear into everything at once. Exactly 1 hour later, Auric returned. "Time," was all he said. She followed him through corridors she'd cleaned 1,000 times but never truly seen. Now, walking instead of scurrying, she noticed details. Ancient carvings depicting battles. Tapestries showing the first Alpha Kings. History written in stone and thread, telling stories of power and conquest. They descended into the lower levels, deeper than she'd ever been allowed. The air grew colder, heavier. The scent of earth and old blood permeated everything. Finally, they reached a massive iron door carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Auric pulled it open. Beyond lay a cavernous training ground, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across walls scarred by countless claws. Weapons hung everywhere, types she'd never seen before. Strange machines stood in corners, their purposes unclear but menacing. The king waited in the center, no longer in his formal robes but dressed for combat in worn leather and scars. "Welcome to the breaking ground," he said as she entered. "This is where I train wolves who need to forget everything they thought they knew." He gestured around the space. 500 years ago, this was a torture chamber. But it's where I forge legends. "Cheerful," Brienne muttered before she could stop herself. The king's laugh surprised her. "You'll need that spirit. What you did this morning. That was rage. Useful but raw. A weapon needs refinement, focus, control. I thought you wanted a weapon, not a warrior." "There's a difference?" He moved to a wall of bladed weapons, running his fingers across them. "A warrior fights with honor, follows rules, believes in noble causes." He selected a wicked curved blade. "A weapon destroys what it's pointed at. No hesitation, no mercy, no honor. And you think I can become that?" He turned, eyes gleaming in the torchlight. "I think you already are. You just don't know it yet." For the next 3 hours, he proved it. The training was nothing like what she'd watched warriors do in the yards. No formal stances. No practice drills. He came at her with brutal efficiency, showing no mercy for her injuries or inexperience. Every time she fell, he forced her to rise. Every time she hesitated, he punished it. "In a real fight, your enemy won't wait for you to recover," he snarled as she struggled to her feet for the 10th time. "They'll cut your throat while you catch your breath." She learned to fight through pain. Learned to turn defense into offense in the space of a heartbeat. Learned that honor got you killed, but unpredictability kept you alive. When he finally called a halt, she collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping. "Better," he said, not even winded. "Tomorrow we work on your speed. The day after, endurance. By the end of the week, you'll be fast enough to kill before your opponent sees you move." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why train in Omega? You have hundreds of warriors." The king crouched beside her, close enough that she could see the scars on his hands. "Because Morgoth isn't stupid. He knows my warriors. Knows their styles, their strengths, their weaknesses. He's been preparing for this war for 20 years. His smile was cold. But he has no idea what's coming. An Omega warrior? It's impossible. Unthinkable. That's exactly why it will work. So I'm a surprise attack. You're an extinction event." He stood, offering a hand. Morgoth believes in the old ways. Believes Omegas are weak, useless, barely worth keeping alive. His entire strategy relies on that assumption. Imagine his face when you tear through his front lines. She took his hand, let him pull her up. And after the war? What happens to your weapon then? We win first. Then we worry about after. Over the following days, Brienne learned what it meant to be broken down and rebuilt. The king's training was relentless, brutal, and impossibly effective. He taught her to fight multiple opponents simultaneously, to use an enemy's strength against them, to find the kill point in every creature. But he also taught her things that confused her. Politics, he said one evening after a particularly grueling session. They sat on the floor of the training ground, sharing a water skin. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to understand how power works. I thought weapons didn't need to think. Mindless weapons get discarded when they're no longer useful. His gaze was sharp. Smart ones? They become indispensable. So she learned about the Southern Pax Alliance, learned about Morgoth's rise to power, how he'd united 12 separate packs under one banner through a mixture of fear and promises, learned about the complex web of treaties and blood debts that held the kingdom together. Morgoth claims I'm a tyrant, the king said, staring into the torchlight. Says the kingdom needs new leadership. Younger leadership. Are you? Brienne asked. A tyrant? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. I've held this kingdom together for 300 years. Prevented 7 civil wars. Protected our lands from invasion 9 times. But I'm also 423 years old. I've made decisions that haunt me. Sacrificed wolves I cared about for the greater good. Enforced laws I knew were cruel because the alternative was chaos. That doesn't answer my question. No, he agreed. But it's the only answer you'll get. On the 7th day, she finally asked what had been bothering her since this began. Why didn't you tell anyone? She blocked his strike, countered with an elbow he barely dodged. About Omegas. If you've known the truth for centuries, why keep it secret? Because the truth would destroy pack structure. He swept her legs, she rolled, came up fighting. Our society is built on hierarchy. Alphas at the top, betas in the middle, omegas at the bottom. Everyone knows their place. It's stable. It's cruel. Often the same thing. He caught her wrist, twisted, she slipped free. But imagine if every omega suddenly realized they weren't actually weak. That the only thing holding them down was belief. What do you think would happen? Revolution. Chaos. Blood. So you keep them ignorant to keep them docile. I keep them ignorant to keep them alive. His voice turned hard. Because the alphas and betas who benefit from the current system? They'd slaughter every omega who tried to rise up. Better to let them survive as servants than die as failed rebels. That's a coward's answer. She regretted the words the instant they left her mouth. The king's eyes flashed gold, his wolf surging forward. In one fluid movement, he had her pinned against the wall, forearm across her throat. Say that again, he whispered, voice like gravel. Her wolf screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat, to show deference to the alpha. But something new had awakened in her over the past week. Something that refused to bow. Cowards. Answer. She forced the words out despite the pressure on her windpipe. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd snap her neck. Then, incredibly, he laughed. There it is. He released her, stepping back. That's what I've been waiting for. The moment you stopped being an omega and became something else entirely. She rubbed her throat, glaring. What am I then? Honestly. He tilted his head, studying her. I'm not sure anymore. But I'm very interested to find out. That night, she couldn't sleep. The room that had seemed luxurious now felt like a gilded cage. She stood at the window, watching the moon rise over the mountains, and thought about everything that had changed. A week ago, she'd been invisible, worthless. Now she was being forged into a weapon that might change the course of a war. But the king's words echoed in her mind. What happened after? When the war ended and the weapon was no longer needed. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Come in. Oric entered, carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The king wanted you to have this. He set it on her table and unwrapped it, revealing a set of weapons unlike anything in the training ground. 2 curved blades, perfectly balanced, their edges sharp enough to split light. The metal seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Shadow steel, Oryx said quietly. Forged in the old ways, before the kingdom united. The kings had these for 2 centuries, waiting for someone worthy to wield them. Why give them to me? Because tomorrow, your Real training begins. His expression was grim. What you've done so far? That was preparation. Testing. Tomorrow you learn to kill. After he left, Brienne picked up one of the blades. It felt right in her hand, like an extension of her arm. She moved through the forms the king had taught her, the blade singing through the air. We're becoming exactly what he wants, her wolf observed. I know. Is that what you want? Brienne lowered the blade, staring at her reflection in the dark metal. I want to matter. For the first time in my life, someone sees me as more than garbage to be swept away. Is that so wrong? What if he's just using you? Then I'll use him right back. The next morning, she entered the training ground to find the king waiting with someone new. A woman, older than the kingdom itself if the power radiating from her was any indication. Her hair was white as snow, but her eyes held the clarity of youth. This is Fenria, the king said. She was my teacher 400 years ago. She's going to teach you what I cannot. And what's that? Brienne asked. The old woman smiled, showing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. How to kill an alpha. The training that followed made everything before seem like a gentle warm-up. Fenria was merciless, ancient, and impossibly skilled. She taught Brienne pressure points that could drop an alpha in seconds. Showed her how to turn an opponent's wolf against them. Revealed the hidden weaknesses every ranked wolf possessed. Alphas are strong, Fenria said, circling Brienne like a predator. But strength is a weakness when you rely on it too heavily. They expect to overpower you. Expect you to break. Use that expectation. Days blurred into weeks. Brienne's body transformed, lean muscle replacing the undernourished frame she'd carried for years. Her movements became fluid, economical, deadly. The frightened Omega who'd scrubbed floors had been burned away, leaving something harder in her place. But with each passing day, she felt herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with combat. The king joined her for evening meals now, and they talked. About history, philosophy, the nature of power. He told her stories of the kingdom's founding, of wars fought and won. She found herself looking forward to these conversations, found her respect for him growing despite herself. One evening, after a particularly brutal training session, she limped to her room to find fresh furs on her bed and a note in unfamiliar handwriting. These belonged to your mother. I thought you should have them. She picked up the furs with trembling hands. They smelled like pine and snow and something achingly familiar. Tears blurred her vision, the first she'd shed since her parents' death. The king had kept her mother's furs for 5 years. She found him in his study, surrounded by maps and reports. He looked up when she entered, expression unreadable. Why did you keep them? She held up the furs. You could barely stand to keep me alive. Why save my mother's things? He set down his quill carefully. Your parents were good wolves. Your mother especially. She once saved my life during a border skirmish. Took an arrow meant for me. He gestured to a scar on his shoulder. I owed her a debt. When they died, I tried to honor it by keeping you in the compound. But the pack wouldn't accept a warrior's daughter without warrior blood. The best I could do was... He trailed off. Let them break me? Keep you alive. His eyes met hers. I'm sorry it took me 5 years to find another way. The apology hung in the air between them. Brienne wanted to hate him, wanted to hold onto the anger that had fueled her through so much darkness. But the truth was more complicated. He'd failed her, protected her, used her, freed her, all at once. The war is coming, she said finally. Morgatha's forces will reach our borders within the month. Is your weapon ready? The king stood, moving to the window. The weapon is ready. The question is whether she'll survive what I'm about to ask her to do. Tell me. He turned, face half in shadow. Morgoth is gathering his forces at Blackwater Crossing. 12 packs, maybe 1,000 wolves. We have 300 warriors at best. He paused. I need you to infiltrate their camp. Pretend to be a refugee Omega. gain their trust. And when the moment comes, his voice dropped. I need you to kill Morgatha's second-in-command. Brienne's breath caught. You want me to assassinate a ranked alpha? Not just any alpha. Dravan the Red, Morgatha's strategist, his closest advisor, and the only wolf keeping that alliance from fracturing into chaos. Remove him, and their entire force collapses into infighting. This is suicide. Probably. The king's honesty was brutal. But it's the only chance we have. A frontal assault will get every one of my warriors killed. But a single Omega, overlooked and underestimated, getting close enough to strike. He smiled grimly. That might actually work. Brienne clutched her mother's furs tighter. And if I refuse? Then we all die when Morgatha's forces overrun us. Including every Omega in this compound. He doesn't believe in mercy, Brienne. He believes in examples. The Omegas will be the first ones he slaughters, just to prove his power. It was manipulation, pure and simple. But it was also true. When do I leave? 3 days. That gives you time to prepare, to memorize everything we know about Morgatha's camp, to become the perfect broken Omega. His expression softened slightly. I wouldn't ask this if there was any other way. Yes, you would. She met his eyes steadily. Because that's what you do. You make the hard choices. Sacrifice the few to save the many. It's what makes you a good king. It's also what makes you a monster. He didn't argue. Over the next 3 days, Brienne prepared for the most dangerous performance of her life. Fenria taught her how to mask her scent, how to move like a frightened Omega again, how to make herself forgettable. The key, the old woman said, is to let them see exactly what they expect. A weak, traumatized Omega fleeing a cruel king. They'll never look past that assumption. The king provided her with everything she'd need. Tattered clothes that smelled of fear and desperation. Fake scars from punishments. A carefully constructed story of abuse and escape that would explain why she'd risk fleeing to Morgatha's territory. On the final night, she stood in the training ground one last time, running through the kill techniques she'd learned. The shadow steel blades were too distinctive to bring, so she'd carry nothing but a small knife, the kind any Omega might steal for protection. You don't have to do this. The king's voice came from the shadows. She didn't stop moving. Yes, I do. I could find another way. Given time. We don't have time. She completed the form, then lowered her hands. Besides, I want to do this. Not for you. Not even for the pack. But for every Omega who's been told they're worthless. I want to prove them all wrong. He stepped into the torchlight, and for the first time, she saw something like regret in his eyes. If you die, it will be my fault. If I die, it will be because Morgatha's wolves are better than you trained me to be. She walked toward him, stopping just out of reach. But I don't plan on dying. I plan on coming back here, covered in Dravan's blood, and watching you keep your promise. What promise? The one you're about to make. That if I do this, if I survive this impossible task, you'll tell every Omega in this kingdom the truth. That they're not weak. That the only chains binding them are the ones we all agreed to pretend are real. The king was silent for a long moment. That would destroy everything. Then maybe everything deserves to be destroyed. You'd start a revolution. You're the one who made me a weapon. She smiled without humor. Weapons don't always stay pointed where you aim them. He studied her face, searching for something. Finally, he nodded once. If you survive this, I'll tell them. All of them. And I'll deal with whatever comes after. Swear it. On your honor as king. I swear it. On my honor as king, and on the memory of your parents, if you return alive, I will free every Omega in this kingdom from the lies that bind them. Brienne felt something fierce and bright ignite in her chest. Then I'll see you in 2 weeks, my king. With Dravan's head as proof. Chapter 3. The Broken Pretense. The journey to Blackwater Crossing took 4 days through territory that grew progressively more hostile. Brienne moved like a shadow through the forests, avoiding main roads, living on scraps and stream water. She'd left everything behind except the ragged clothes on her back and the small knife hidden in her boot. By the time Morgatha's sentries found her, She looked exactly like what she was pretending to be. Hollow-eyed. Desperate. Terrified. Please, she whispered when they surrounded her, falling to her knees in the mud. Please, I'm just trying to get away. She let tears come, genuine tears born from 5 years of real suffering. I can't go back there. I'd rather die. The wolves exchanged glances. Omegas didn't flee. They were too broken, too conditioned. This one must have suffered something truly horrific. What pack? One of them demanded. Shadowcrest. The name tasted like ash. The lead sentry's eyes widened. Sulien's pack? You ran from the Alpha King himself? She nodded, letting her whole body shake. He's a monster. What he does to Omegas, the things he makes us. She trailed off, implying horrors she didn't need to voice. Lord Morgoth, they say he's different. They say he's building a better kingdom. Lord Morgoth believes all wolves have value, another sentry said, voice gentling. Even Omegas. Come on, let's get you to camp. You're safe now. The word was a knife to her ribs. They led her through the forest to Blackwater Crossing, and Brienne's first glimpse of Morgoth's forces made her understand exactly how desperate their situation truly was. Hundreds of wolves filled the massive encampment. Cooking fires burned in organized rows. Warriors drilled in open fields. This wasn't just an army. It was a migration. They brought her to a large tent near the center of camp, where a beta woman with kind eyes examined her injuries. Real ones from training, old ones from her years as an Omega, new ones she'd inflicted on herself to sell the story. You've been through hell, the woman murmured, bandaging a cut on Brienne's arm. But you're safe here. Lord Morgoth doesn't tolerate the abuse of Omegas. You'll see. Over the next 3 days, Brienne learned the truth of Morgoth's revolution. It was seductive. Omegas here weren't beaten or starved. They worked alongside betas, even trained in basic self-defense. Children played without fear. Hope lived here in a way it never had in Shadowcrest. She also learned that Morgoth was charismatic, young, and absolutely convinced of his righteousness. The old ways are dying, he told an assembly on her second night in camp. Kings who've lived too long, grown too cruel, too disconnected from their people. We're not just fighting for territory. We're fighting for a new kingdom. One where rank doesn't determine worth. The gathered wolves cheered. Brienne cheered with them, even as her wolf snarled in confusion. He's right, her wolf whispered. About Sulien. About the old ways. Then why are we here to kill his second? Brienne murmured under her breath. No answer came. Finding Dravan the Red proved easier than expected. He was Morgoth's shadow, always present, always watchful. A massive alpha with rust-colored fur and eyes like amber. He ran the training exercises, planned the march routes, and seemed to see everything. Including her. You, he said on her 4th day, approaching where she helped other Omegas prepare the evening meal. You're the one who fled from Shadowcrest. Brienne's heart hammered, but she kept her eyes down. Yes, Lord. Look at me. She raised her eyes slowly, carefully. Dravan studied her with unnerving intensity. You're different from the others, he said finally. The way you move. Like a fighter, not a victim. Terror, genuine and sharp, flooded her veins. Had she been made so quickly? The king's warriors used to practice near where I worked, she whispered. I watched them sometimes. Tried to copy what I saw in my head. It helped me feel less powerless. It was perfect. The right mix of truth and fiction to explain anything he might have noticed. Dravan's expression softened slightly. Would you like to learn for real? We're training some of the Omegas in basic defense. Nothing fancy, but enough to protect themselves. She let hope creep into her voice. Really? You'd teach an Omega to fight? Everyone should know how to defend themselves. He gestured toward the training grounds. Let's see what you remember from watching. This was dangerous. If she showed too much skill, he'd know. Too little, and he might not keep her close. She needed access, needed to become trusted, invisible. On the training grounds, she let him correct her stance, stumbled through basic blocks, showed improvement slowly enough to seem natural. But she also let him see determination, intelligence, the kind of Omega who might be useful. "You're a quick learner," Draven said after an hour. "Keep practicing. We need wolves with spirit in the new kingdom." Over the following days, Brienne carefully built her place in the camp, helped where needed, trained with growing competence, listened to everything, learned the guard rotations, the camp layout, where Morgoth and Draven slept. She also learned something that made her task infinitely more complicated. Draven was genuinely kind. He remembered names, checked on injured wolves, made sure even the lowest Omegas received proper food and shelter. He was building Morgoth's dream with real conviction, real hope. Not a monster, not a tyrant, just a wolf who believed in a better world. Killing him would be murder, not execution. Does it matter? Her wolf asked one night as she lay awake in the Omega tent. He's still the target. Still the obstacle between Sulien's kingdom and survival. "It matters to me," Brienne whispered, but duty pressed down like a stone on her chest. She'd made a promise, sworn to return with Draven's head. The fate of every Omega in Shadowcrest depended on her success. The opportunity came on her 8th night in camp. Draven asked her to help inventory weapons in the supply tent. Alone. Just the two of them in an isolated space, surrounded by blades and opportunities. Her knife sat heavy in her boot. One strike. Fast and true. Just like Fenria taught her. "You're troubled," Draven said, not looking up from his counting. "I can smell it." Brienne's hand moved toward her boot, then stopped. "Just thinking about the war. What happens when we reach Shadowcrest? Worried about facing your old pack? Something like that." He set down the sword he'd been examining and turned to face her fully. "I know you're afraid. But Morgoth isn't like Sulien. We're not conquerors. We're liberators. By killing everyone who stands in your way? By removing a tyrant who's held power for too long. Sulien has ruled for 300 years, Brienne. 3 centuries of enforcing the same cruel hierarchies, the same suffering. How many Omegas do you think have lived and died in misery under his reign? How many more will if we don't stop him?" Her hand was on the knife handle now, hidden beneath her shirt. "And you're so sure you're better? That you won't become exactly what you're fighting against?" "I'm sure I'll try." Draven smiled sadly. "That's all any of us can do. Try to be better than what came before. One strike. That's all it would take." Before he even knew she'd moved. Instead, she asked a question. "What happens to the Omegas in Shadowcrest? After you win?" "They'll be freed. Integrated into the new pack structure. Given choices they've never had before." He leaned against the table. "Why?" "Because if I help you," Brienne said slowly, watching his reaction, "if I tell you everything I know about Shadowcrest defenses, I need to know the Omegas will be safe." Draven's eyes widened. "You'd betray your pack?" "My pack betrayed me first." The bitterness in her voice was real. 5 years of abuse. 5 years of being nothing. "If you're really building something better, I want to be part of it." She watched him weigh her words, calculate risks and benefits. This was the moment. Either he'd believe her or he'd realize she was a threat. Finally, he nodded. "Tell me what you know." And Brienne did. She gave him real information, valuable intelligence about Shadowcrest's layout and guard positions. But she also lied. Inflated their numbers. Made their defenses sound stronger than they were. Planted seeds of doubt and caution that would slow Morgoth's assault. Because somewhere between entering this camp and this moment, she'd realized something crucial. Both sides were right. Both sides were wrong. Sulien was a tyrant who perpetuated a cruel system, but he maintained stability and protected his people. Morgoth was a revolutionary with noble goals, but his methods would lead to civil war and countless deaths. Neither deserved to win completely. Neither deserved to lose entirely. So Brienne made a decision that would probably get her killed. She was going to play both sides. Weaken Morgoth's assault enough that Sulien could hold, but also ensure Sulien took enough damage that he'd have to negotiate, have to change, have to honor his promise about freeing the Omegas. It was insane. Impossible. The kind of plan that required perfect timing and incredible luck. She was going to do it anyway. Over the next week, she fed Draven information while simultaneously sabotaging Morgatha's preparations in small ways. A weapons shipment that mysteriously went to the wrong unit. Training schedules that resulted in exhausted wolves. Supply counts that were always slightly off, creating shortages. But she also watched, learned, grew to respect what Morgoth was building, even as she worked to undermine it. The attack was scheduled for the new moon. Draven showed her the battle plans himself, trusting her completely now. A three-pronged assault designed to overwhelm Shadowcrest's defenses through sheer numbers. You won't have to fight, Draven assured her. The Omegas will stay in the rear guard, protected. When it's over, you can return to Shadowcrest as a free wolf. Brienne nodded, her heart heavy with what she had to do next. That night, she slipped from camp with a stolen horse and rode hard for Shadowcrest. She had 4 days before the assault. 4 days to warn Sulien, adjust his defenses, and somehow survive what came next. The compound guards nearly killed her on sight before recognizing her scent. They dragged her, filthy and exhausted, before the king in his war room. Sulien dismissed everyone except Auric and Fenria. When the door closed, his expression was unreadable. Report, was all he said. Brienne told him everything. Morgatha's troop numbers. Their battle plans. The three-pronged assault. But she also told him about what she'd seen. The hope in that camp. The genuine belief in something better. Draven is a good wolf, she said finally. Killing him won't stop this war. It'll make it worse. They'll fight harder, angrier. They'll never surrender. Then what do you suggest? The king's voice was cold. I sent you to assassinate a target. You come back empty-handed, telling me the enemy is too noble to kill. Should I reward your failure? Brienne met his eyes steadily. I suggest we win this war without destroying everything worth saving. I suggest we fight smart, not just hard. And I suggest... She took a deep breath. I suggest you keep your promise. About the Omegas. Because if we can offer Morgatha's wolves something real, something better than just victory, they might actually stop fighting. Auric looked skeptical. Fenria smiled slightly, as if she'd expected this. The king circled his war table, studying the maps with centuries of tactical experience. Finally he spoke. Tell me about their formation. Every detail. Every weakness you created. He looked up. And then tell me how you think we can end this with minimal bloodshed on both sides. So she did. They worked through the night, adjusting Shadowcrest's defenses, positioning warriors to counter Morgatha's assault while minimizing casualties. It was a careful dance, trying to win without crushing the opposition completely. As dawn approached, the king finally asked the question she'd been dreading. Did you mean to come back? Brienne considered lying. Considered telling him she'd always planned to betray Morgoth. But the king deserved honesty. I wasn't sure, she admitted. Right up until I left that camp, I didn't know which side I'd choose. Maybe neither. Maybe both. And yet you're here. Because you made me a promise. And because... She struggled for words. Because I think you can change. I think you want to. You just needed a reason. The king laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're a terrible weapon, Brienne Ashfeld. Weapons aren't supposed to have opinions. Then maybe you built the wrong thing. 3 days later, Morgatha's forces reached Shadowcrest's borders. Brienne stood on the compound walls beside the king, watching the massive army assemble across the valley. Last chance, Sulien said quietly. You could still run. Disappear. Neither side would find you if you truly wanted to vanish. I could, she agreed. But then I'd never know if we could actually pull this off. Pull what off? Brienne smiled, fierce and bright. Changing the world. The battle horns sounded across the valley. Morgatha's forces began their advance, exactly as Draven had planned. And Shadowcrest's defenders moved into position, exactly as Brienne and Sulien had prepared. But as the first waves clashed, something unexpected happened. Brienne ran down from the walls, out through the gates, and directly into no man's land between the armies. What is she doing? Auric shouted from the walls. The king watched with ancient eyes. Something either very stupid or very brilliant. Possibly both. Brienne stood alone in the killing ground, unarmed and unarmored, and threw back her head. She howled. Not the howl of submission or fear. The howl of challenge. A fury. Of an Omega who refused to bow. Both armies faltered, confused. An Omega didn't challenge anyone. It was impossible. Then Dravan's voice rang out across the battlefield. Brienne? What are you doing? She turned toward Morgoth's forces. I'm trying to stop you from making a terrible mistake. We offered you freedom. We trusted you. Dravan's voice carried hurt, betrayal. And I betrayed that trust, she called back. Because I was sent here as a weapon. Sent to kill you specifically. To destroy your alliance and ensure King Sulien's victory. Shocked silence. But I didn't do it, she continued. Because I realized something. You're not wrong about Sulien. He is a tyrant. The old ways are cruel. But Sulien isn't wrong about you either. This war will kill thousands. Destroy everything you're trying to build. Neither of you can win without losing everything that matters. She speaks sense, the king's voice echoed across the field. He'd come down from the walls, flanked by his personal guard. Which is inconvenient, since I was planning to win this fight. Morgoth pushed through his forces, young and burning with righteous fury. You sent an assassin after my second? You'd stoop to such cowardice? I sent a weapon, Sulien corrected calmly. But weapons sometimes choose their own targets. Brienne, step aside. This is bigger than you now. No, she said simply. It's not. She looked between the two leaders. Ancient king and revolutionary challenger. Both powerful. Both convinced of their righteousness. Both willing to sacrifice thousands for their vision. I'm an Omega, Brienne said. The lowest rank. Worthless by your standards. But I've stood in both your camps. I've seen what you're each fighting for. And I'm telling you, there's a better way. What way? Morgoth demanded. Brienne took a deep breath. The king promised me something. If I survived my mission, he'd tell every Omega in his kingdom the truth. That they're not weak. That the ranks are a lie. That the only thing making them powerless is belief. She turned to Sulien. Keep that promise. Right now. In front of both armies. Prove that you can change. The king's jaw tightened. You're asking me to destabilize my entire kingdom. I'm asking you to evolve it. And what does Morgoth offer in return? Brienne faced the younger alpha. Peace. A chance to rebuild without war. Integration of your wolves into a changing kingdom, not as conquered enemies but as partners in reformation. He'd never agree to that, Morgoth scoffed. Try me, Sulien said softly. The battlefield held its collective breath. Finally, the king spoke, his voice carrying to every wolf present. I am 423 years old. I have ruled this kingdom for 3 centuries. And in all that time, I have enforced laws I knew were unjust because I believed stability mattered more than fairness. But this Omega... He gestured to Brienne. She defeated 12 of my best warriors. Infiltrated an enemy army. Chose principle over orders. And she's forced me to ask a question I should have asked centuries ago. What if everything we believe about rank is wrong? Gasps rippled through both armies. I hereby abolish the Omega designation, Sulien continued. Effective immediately. Every wolf in my kingdom will be judged by their actions, not their birth. Every Omega will receive training. Opportunity. Choice. He looked at Morgoth. I'm old. Set in my ways. I'll need help building this new kingdom. Are you willing to help me change? Or would you rather fight a war that will destroy us both? Morgoth stood frozen, clearly unprepared for this turn. His warriors looked to him, waiting for orders that didn't come. Then Dravan stepped forward. I vote we build, not destroy. One by one, Morgoth's other lieutenants echoed the sentiment. The young alpha's shoulders sagged, fury and relief warring on his face. You've denied me my righteous war, old wolf. I've offered you something better, Sulien replied. The chance to actually create the kingdom you dreamed of, instead of conquering ruins. Brienne stood between them, barely breathing, as history balanced on a knife's edge. Finally, Morgoth extended his hand. Sulian took it. And just like that, the war ended before it truly began. The first week after the treaty was chaos. Morgoth's forces integrated with Shadowcrest's in a delicate dance of suspicion and hope. Wolves who'd been enemies days before now trained side by side, neither fully trusting the peace. Brawls broke out regularly. 3 wolves died in what was officially called accidental training incidents. Brienne moved through it all like a ghost, belonging to neither side completely. The Shadowcrest wolves saw her as a traitor. Morgoth's forces knew she'd infiltrated them with intent to assassinate. Even the Omegas, newly freed, didn't know what to make of her. She was alone in a crowd of thousands. "They're calling you the Kingbreaker," Oryx said one morning, finding her on the eastern ramparts where she'd taken to watching the sunrise. "Both armies. They say you broke the old king, forced him to change." "I didn't break him," Brienne replied. "I just showed him the cracks were already there." Semantics. Oryx leaned against the wall beside her. "The council is meeting today. Sulian and Morgoth, deciding how to actually govern this combined kingdom. You should be there." "I'm an Omega. I don't belong in council meetings." "You're not an Omega anymore. None of you are. That's the whole point." He studied her. "You started this revolution, Brienne. You don't get to hide from it now." The council chamber was crowded beyond capacity when she arrived. Sulian sat at the head of the long table, looking every one of his 400 years. Morgoth sat to his right, young and restless. Around them, a mix of advisors from both factions argued in heated voices. "Cannot simply dismantle pack structure? The Omegas lack proper training. My wolves won't follow a king who betrayed everything we believe. Enough." Sulian's voice cut through the chaos. "We have a guest." Every eye turned to Brienne, standing in the doorway. "She's no guest," one of Morgoth's advisors growled. "She's a spy and an assassin." "She's the wolf who prevented this war," Morgoth countered. "That earns her a seat at this table." "There are no empty seats," someone pointed out. Sulian stood, gesturing to his chair. "She can have mine." The room went silent. "My king, you cannot," Oryx started. "I can and I am." The ancient alpha's expression was unreadable. "Brienne, come here." She crossed the room on shaking legs. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Omegas didn't sit in the king's chair. Didn't participate in governance. Didn't matter. Except she wasn't an Omega anymore. None of them were. She sat. The chair was too large, carved for an alpha's frame. But as she settled into it, something shifted in the room's dynamic. This was power. Not the power of strength or fear, but the power of legitimacy. Of being seen. The matching. "Now then," Sulian said, remaining standing. "Let's discuss how to actually rebuild a kingdom." The meeting lasted 6 hours. Brienne mostly listened, learning the complexity of governance she'd never considered. Territory disputes. Resource allocation. How to integrate 12 separate pack hierarchies into something cohesive. But when they discussed the freed Omegas, she finally spoke. "You're talking about them like they're problems to solve," she said quietly. "Resources to allocate. But they're wolves who've been suppressed their entire lives. They don't need jobs and housing. They need purpose." "What would you suggest?" Morgoth asked, genuinely curious. "Train them. Not just basic defense, but real warrior training. Give them the choice to join the guard, the scouts, whatever they want. Some will fail. Many will succeed. But at least they'll have tried." "The warriors won't accept Omega partners," someone objected. "Then the warriors can adjust," Brienne replied, voice hardening. "Because the king abolished the designation. That means either all wolves are equal, or this entire piece is a lie." Sulian's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. The meetings became routine. Daily councils where Brienne found herself increasingly involved in decisions that affected thousands. She discovered she had a talent for seeing connections others missed, for finding compromises that satisfied both factions. But she also discovered the cost of power. One morning, 3 weeks after the treaty, Fenrir found her in the training grounds before dawn. You haven't been sleeping, the old woman observed. Too much to think about. Or too much guilt. Fenrir settled onto a bench, ancient bones creaking. You're wondering if you made the right choice. If ending the war was worth the chaos that followed. Brienne stopped mid-form. 5 wolves have died in accidents since the treaty. At least 20 serious injuries. The kingdom is fracturing even without a war. Growing pains, Fenrir said. Change is never clean. Never easy. But it's better than the alternative. Is it? Morgoth's wolves are talking about leaving. Forming their own splinter pack. If they go, others will follow. We'll have civil war anyway. Then stop them. I'm not a king. Not a leader. I'm just... She stopped, realizing she was about to say, just an Omega. Fenrir's knowing smile confirmed she'd heard the unspoken words. You keep trying to define yourself by what you were, instead of embracing what you've become. And what's that? A bridge. Between old and new. Between Sulien's experience and Morgoth's vision. Between what was and what could be. The old woman stood. But bridges must be strong, child. They carry weight from both directions. Are you strong enough? The question haunted Brienne for days. Her answer came during the full moon gathering, a tradition both kingdoms shared. Every wolf in the massive compound assembled in the northern fields to run together under the moon's light. It was supposed to be unifying. A reminder that despite rank and faction, they were all wolves. Instead, it revealed how fractured they truly were. Morgoth's wolves clustered together, separate from Shadowcrest's warriors. The freed Omegas formed their own nervous group, belonging to neither. Tension crackled in the air, ready to ignite at the smallest spark. Brienne stood apart from all of them, watching the moon rise and wondering if this entire piece had been a mistake. Then Draven found her. Avoiding the festivities? He asked. She'd barely spoken to him since returning to Shadowcrest. The betrayal still hung between them, unaddressed. Didn't seem appropriate, she replied. Given that half these wolves want me dead. More like 3/4, Draven said with grim humor. The remaining quarter just want to understand why you did it. He sat beside her on the hillside. So? Why did you? Brienne considered her answer carefully. Because both sides were right. Both sides were wrong. And I couldn't bear to watch thousands die for a war neither of you needed to fight. Noble. Also arrogant. What made you think you could decide for all of us? Nothing. I just knew if I didn't try, I'd regret it forever. She looked at him. I'm sorry. For lying to you. For using your trust against you. Are you? Really? Draven's amber eyes studied her. Or are you just sorry it was necessary? Both, I think. He laughed, surprised and genuine. At least you're honest about it. He gestured to the gathering below. Look at them. 2 armies that should be one pack. Morgoth's forces ready to leave. Sulien's warriors ready to let them. Everything you fought for falling apart. I know. So fix it. I'm not. Not a leader? Not important enough? Not worthy? Draven cut her off. Brienne, you sat in the king's chair. You shaped policy that affects thousands. You ended a war through sheer audacity. Stop pretending you're still that broken Omega scrubbing floors. Below, the first fights were breaking out. Shoving matches between Morgoth's wolves and Shadowcrest's warriors. The freed Omegas backing away, retreating to old patterns of submission. Brienne stood. If I do this, there's no going back. I'll be choosing to be something I never wanted to be. What's that? Someone who matters. She shifted before Draven could respond. Her wolf form was smaller than most warriors, lean and quick rather than massive. But when she threw back her head and howled, every wolf in the valley heard it. It wasn't a howl of challenge or submission. It was a howl of pack. Of unity. Of belonging. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Sulien shifted, his massive silver form breaking from the Shadowcrest cluster. He joined his howl to hers. Morgoth followed, golden fur catching the moonlight. One by one, other wolves joined. Warriors and former enemies, freed omegas and ancient betas. Their howls merged into something beautiful and terrible, a sound that echoed off the mountains and reminded every wolf present what they'd almost lost. When the song finally faded, Brienne shifted back to human form. "We can spend tonight fighting," she called out, voice carrying across the field. "Proving that old hatreds matter more than new possibilities. Or we can run together. Actually see if this peace is worth fighting for." "Easy for you to say," someone shouted from Morgatha's cluster. "You're the Kingbreaker. You've already proven yourself." "I've proven I can make people angry," Brienne corrected. "That I can make impossible choices and live with the consequences. But every wolf here has proven something. We're all still standing. Still trying. That counts for more than any howl." She looked across the assembled wolves, meeting eyes both hostile and hopeful. "I don't know if this peace will work. I don't know if we can truly become one pack. But I know we owe it to every wolf who didn't have to die on a battlefield to at least try." Silence stretched across the field. Then one of the freed omegas stepped forward. A small female named Tasman who'd scrubbed floors beside Brienne for 3 years. "I'll run with you." Another omega joined her. Then a Shadowcrest warrior, one of Morgatha's scouts. A beta from the Eastern Territories. Not everyone moved. Not even half. But enough. Enough to matter. They ran together under the full moon, and for a few hours, rank and faction meant nothing. There was only the pack, the hunt, the ancient joy of running wild. It wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Brienne woke to find Sulian sitting in her room, reading in the early light. "That's creepy," she said, sitting up. 400 years old. I've earned the right to be creepy." He closed the book. "That was well done last night. The howl. The speech. Very inspiring. But inspiring moments don't solve the fundamental problem. Morgatha's wolves still want to leave. They're only staying because Morgath himself is wavering, and even that won't last much longer." The king's eyes were tired. "We have maybe a week before this alliance fractures completely. What do you want from me? I want you to do what you do best. Find the impossible solution." He stood, moving to the window. "Morgath respects you. His wolves fear you. Mine don't trust you. You're the only wolf in this kingdom who belongs to everyone and no one. That's not an advantage. Isn't it?" He glanced back. "Everyone else is trapped by their loyalties. Their histories. You're free to see clearly. Use that." After he left, Brienne spent the day observing. Watching the tensions, the small conflicts, the way wolves clustered by faction even when they were supposed to be training together. The problem was trust. Or rather, the lack of it. Morgatha's wolves didn't believe Sulian would truly change. Shadowcrest's warriors didn't believe Morgath wouldn't eventually rebel. And neither side believed the freed omegas could actually contribute anything meaningful. By evening, she had an idea. Insane, dangerous, and probably doomed to fail. Perfect. She found Morgath and Sulian in the war room, arguing over territory assignments. "I need you both to trust me," she said without preamble. They looked up, surprised. "That depends on what you're asking," Morgath replied. "I want to lead a mixed unit on the Northern Patrol. Morgatha's wolves, Shadowcrest warriors, and freed omegas. Equal numbers. No rank structure based on origin, only skill and experience." "Absolutely not," Sulian said immediately. "They'll kill each other before they reach the border." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll learn to work together because their survival depends on it." She leaned over the table. "The Northern Territories are contested by rogues. Real threats that don't care about our internal politics. Give me 2 weeks with a mixed unit. If we fail, you lose nothing. If we succeed, you have proof this integration can work. You want to risk wolves' lives on a social experiment?" Morgath demanded. "I want to give them a reason to trust each other. Shared danger. Shared success." She met his eyes. "You built your entire revolution on the idea that wolves are more than their rank. Prove it." The two leaders exchanged glances. 2 weeks, Sulian said finally. "But I'm sending Auric with you. Someone needs to report back when this inevitably fails." 3 days later, Brienne led her mixed unit of 30 wolves into the northern territories. The tension was so thick she could taste it. Morgatha's wolves clustered on one side of their camp. Shadowcrest warriors on the other. The freed Omegas, including Tasman, stayed nervously in the middle. "This is going to be a disaster," Oric muttered as they made camp the first night. "Probably," Brienne agreed. "But it's our disaster." The first 2 days were exactly as dysfunctional as expected. Warriors from both factions refused to follow orders from the other side. The freed Omegas were hesitant to assert themselves. Simple tasks took twice as long because no one would cooperate. On the third day, they encountered their first rogue pack. 7 wolves, lean and desperate, attacked their supply convoy. Brienne's unit scattered, falling back on factional groups instead of coordinated defense. A Shadowcrest warrior went down, claws raking across his side. One of the freed Omegas froze in terror. "Formation!" Brienne roared, but no one listened. Then Tasman did something unexpected. She threw herself at the rogue threatening the frozen Omega, small but fierce. She couldn't win that fight alone. A Morgoth warrior saw it happen, hesitated, then lunged to help her. That broke the paralysis. Suddenly wolves were fighting together, protecting each other regardless of faction. When the rogues finally fled, Brienne's unit stood together, panting and bloodied but intact. "That," she said into the silence that followed, "is what we can be." Progress came in small increments after that. A Shadowcrest warrior teaching a freed Omega how to track. Morgatha's scout sharing water with a former enemy. Jokes around the campfire that included everyone, not just factional clusters. By the end of the first week, they functioned like an actual unit. The second week, they faced something worse than rogues. Scouts reported a massive bear den, unusually aggressive, threatening the settlements in the lowlands. Traditional pack law said this was Shadowcrest's problem to solve. But Brienne's mixed unit was closest. "We should send for reinforcements," one of the Shadowcrest warriors argued. "This is a 3-bear den. We're not equipped." "We're 30 strong," Brienne interrupted. "Mixed skills, mixed tactics. We can handle this." "Or we can all die proving a point," Morgatha's second-in-command countered. His name was Kellen, and he'd been skeptical of this entire mission from the start. "Then stay here," Brienne said. "Anyone who doesn't want to risk it, guard the camp." "But I'm going." She expected maybe 10 volunteers. 20 wolves stepped forward. The bear den was everything the scouts promised and worse. 3 massive bears, protecting cubs, in a cave system that negated most of their numbers' advantage. It should have been a slaughter. Instead, it became a masterclass in cooperation. The freed Omegas, smaller and quicker, lured the bears into open spaces. Morgatha's wolves, trained in unconventional tactics, used the terrain to their advantage. Shadowcrest's warriors provided the raw strength needed for the killing blows. They lost no one, took down all 3 bears, saved the lowland settlements. When they returned to camp, exhausted and triumphant, something had fundamentally changed. These weren't 3 factions anymore. They were a pack. "I owe you an apology," Kellen said that night, approaching Brienne at the fire. "I thought this was a waste. That you were naive to think we could work together. And now I think you're still naive." He smiled to soften the words. "But maybe that's what we needed. Someone too stubborn to accept that this was impossible." 2 weeks later, they returned to Shadowcrest as heroes. Word of the bear den had spread. The mixed unit that succeeded where traditional factions would have failed. Sulien and Morgoth waited at the gates. "Well?" the old king asked. "It works," Brienne replied. "Not perfectly. Not easily. But it works." Over the following month, more mixed units formed. Not ordered from above but requested by warriors who'd seen what Brienne's unit accomplished. The integration accelerated, driven by success rather than mandate. But success created new problems. Traditional warriors felt their status threatened. Freed Omegas, given real power for the first time, sometimes wielded it poorly. The changes came too fast for some, too slow for others. Brienne found herself increasingly pulled into disputes, mediating conflicts, making judgments that affected lives. It was exhausting. One evening, she escaped to the ramparts, seeking solitude. Draven found her there, as he often did. "You're avoiding the council meeting," he observed. "I'm avoiding people in general. That's what happens when you become important. People need things from you." He joined her, looking out over the compound. "For what it's worth, you're doing better than anyone expected." "That's a low bar." "True." He was quiet for a moment. "Morgoth asked me to sound you out on something." "That sounds ominous." "He wants to propose a formal power-sharing structure. A council of equals rather than a king with advisors. He'll float it at tomorrow's meeting." Draven studied her reaction. "He wants to know if you'll support it." "Will Sulien? That's the question, isn't it? He's been king for 3 centuries. Asking him to share power equally." Draven trailed off. "It could go very badly." Brienne thought about it. About Sulien, ancient and proud, being asked to diminish his authority. About Morgoth, young and impatient, pushing for changes the kingdom might not be ready for. "What do you think?" she asked Draven. "I think change is necessary. I also think timing matters. Push too hard, too fast, and even positive change breaks things." He met her eyes. "You're the one who sees clearly, remember? What do you see?" What she saw was a kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. Progress and backlash fighting for dominance. A peace that could still shatter. "I see a choice," she said finally, "between the kingdom we need and the kingdom we're ready for. And I'm not sure those are the same thing." The council meeting the next day was exactly as contentious as expected. Morgoth presented his proposal eloquently. A governing council of 7 wolves, representing different factions and perspectives, making decisions collectively rather than by royal decree. "It's time to end the Age of Kings," he concluded. "Time for something new." Sulien's expression was unreadable. "You want me to abdicate. I want you to evolve. We all do." Morgoth gestured around the table. "This isn't about removing you. It's about sharing power more equitably." "And if I refuse?" The tension in the room crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. "Then we're back where we started," Morgoth said quietly. "Talking about change while clinging to old systems. It makes everything we've accomplished meaningless." All eyes turned to Sulien. The ancient king sat in his chair, older than anyone present, older than the kingdom itself in its current form. 423 years of absolute power, being asked to share it with 6 others. "Brienne," he said finally, "you're quiet. What do you think?" She'd been dreading this moment. Whatever she said would be seen as choosing sides. "I think," she said carefully, "that power shared is not power lost. It's power multiplied by the wisdom of those who share it." She looked at Sulien. "You've ruled alone for 3 centuries. Has it made you happier? Wiser? Or just more tired?" Something flickered in the old king's eyes. "Pain maybe. Or relief." "I'm so tired," he admitted, so quietly she almost missed it. "Of making decisions that affect thousands. Of carrying the weight alone. Of being the only wolf who remembers how we got here." "Then let us help you carry it," Brienne said. "Not because you're weak, but because even the strongest shoulders need relief sometimes." Sulien looked around the table. At Morgoth, young and burning with conviction. At his own advisors, loyal but exhausted from decades of war and politics. At the freed Omegas now sitting in chambers where they'd once scrubbed floors. "A council of 7, he said finally. "But I choose 3. Morgoth chooses 3. You all elect the 7th to break ties." "That could work," Morgoth said slowly. "It will work," Sulien corrected. "Because the alternative is watching everything we've built crumble. And I've sacrificed too much to let that happen." The vote for the 7th council member happened a week later. Every wolf in the compound, regardless of former rank or faction, cast their choice. Brienne won by a landslide. "I don't want this," she told Sulien when the results came in. "I didn't want to be king at first either," he replied. 400 years later, here we are. Sometimes we don't get what we want. We get what's needed. The Council of 7 took power on the winter solstice. Sulien and 3 of his choosing, Morgoth and 3 of his, and Brienne, belonging to everyone and no one, holding the balance. Their first official act was to formally abolish all rank designations. No more alphas, betas, or omegas. Just wolves, each valued for their contributions rather than their birth. Their second act was to establish schools. Not just warrior training but education for all wolves. Reading, history, governance. The tools to think critically and challenge authority when necessary. The changes didn't solve everything. Old prejudices died hard. Some wolves left, unable or unwilling to adapt. 3 assassination attempts targeted council members in the first month alone. But slowly, painfully, the kingdom transformed. Brienne stood on the ramparts 6 months after the council formed, watching the sun rise over a compound that barely resembled the place where she'd once scrubbed floors. "Surveying your kingdom?" Dravan's voice came from behind her. "Not my kingdom. Our kingdom." She glanced at him. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "You're on the governing council. You shape policy. Make decisions that affect thousands. Seems like power to me. Power shared is different than power hoarded." She turned to face him fully. "I learned that from watching Sulien let go. From seeing Morgoth compromise. From realizing that the strongest wolves are the ones willing to admit they need help." Draven smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just too stubborn to quit." She looked back at the sunrise. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd killed you? If I'd completed my original mission?" "Sometimes." His voice was thoughtful. "We'd have fought our war. Thousands would have died. One side would have won, and the other would have spent generations planning revenge. The cycle would have continued. Instead we have this message. Imperfect. But better. Better," he agreed. "Thanks to an Omega who refused to be what everyone told her she was." "I'm not an Omega anymore." "No," Dravan said softly. "You're something much more dangerous. You're free." The peace lasted 8 months before someone tried to destroy it. Brienne was reviewing supply reports when Auric burst into the council chamber, face pale. "We have a problem," he said. "A big one." The problem was named Corveth, a Shadowcrest elder who'd been quietly gathering support among traditionalist wolves. He'd just declared the Council of 7 illegitimate and called for a return to the old ways. "How many wolves does he have?" Morgoth demanded. "At least 200. Maybe more." Auric spread a map on the table. "They've occupied the eastern barracks and are refusing to recognize council authority." "So we have a rebellion," Sulien said calmly. Too calmly. "Not yet. But if we handle this wrong, it could become one." Brienne studied the map. "Corveth is smart. He's waiting to see how we respond. Show weakness and others will join him. Show excessive force, and we prove his point about tyranny." "What do you suggest?" one of Morgoth's council members asked. "I talked to him." "Absolutely not," Dravan objected. He'd been appointed as chief of security after demonstrating his tactical brilliance. "Corveth hates you specifically. You're everything he despises about the new order." "Exactly. Which is why I'm the only one who can reach him." Brienne stood. "If Sulien goes, it's the old king trying to crush dissent. If Morgoth goes, it's the revolutionary defending his changes. But if I go..." She paused. "It's a freed Omega telling him he's wrong. Either he listens or he proves he's exactly the bigot we all think he is." The council argued for another hour, but eventually agreed. Brienne would meet with Corveth, flanked by guards but coming in peace. The eastern barracks looked like a fortress when she arrived. Warriors lined the walls, all wearing the old pack insignias that had been officially retired. Corveth's message was clear. He wanted the past back. They let her enter, but took her weapons and searched her thoroughly. She was led to a training hall where Corveth waited, surrounded by his supporters. He was old, nearly as old as Sulien, with scars that told stories of countless battles. His eyes held the weight of centuries and the fury of watching his world change beyond recognition. "The Kingbreaker herself," he said. "Come to negotiate our surrender? Come to understand why you're doing this?" Brienne kept her voice level. You served Sulien for 300 years. Fought for this kingdom. Why turn against it now? Because this isn't the kingdom I fought for. Corveth gestured around the hall. Look at what we've become. Omegas on the governing council. Rank abolished. Warriors training alongside wolves who should be serving them. Everything that made us strong, thrown away for some fantasy of equality. You mean everything that kept you at the top, Brienne countered. This isn't about the kingdom's strength. It's about your status. Easy words from someone who's climbed her way up. His lip curled. You think you're the first Omega to get ideas? To think they're special? I've seen a dozen like you over the centuries. All eventually remember their place. My place. Brienne felt her wolf stir, that familiar anger rising. My place was scrubbing floors while warriors who couldn't beat me in a fair fight laughed. My place was being invisible, worthless, nothing. If that's the kingdom you want back, then yes, we have a problem. At least it was stable. At least wolves knew where they belonged. Stability built on cruelty is just cruelty with better manners. She took a step closer. You talk about strength? I beat 12 of Sulien's best warriors when I was supposedly weak. I infiltrated Morgatha's army when I was supposedly worthless. What have you done lately except hide behind old glories and older prejudices? Corvetha's eyes flashed yellow. Careful, girl. You may sit on a council, but you're in my territory now. Then prove me wrong. Brienne spread her arms. You say Omegas are weak? Fight me. Right here. Right now. No weapons, no tricks. Just you and me. If you win, I'll recommend the council reconsider these reforms. If I win, you disband this rebellion and accept the new order. The hall went silent. You're serious? Corveth said slowly. Completely. One of his advisors leaned in, whispering urgently. Corveth brushed him off. You're younger. Faster. Recently trained. How is that a fair fight? It isn't, Brienne agreed. But when has anything about rank ever been fair? You've had centuries of advantage. I've had 8 months of freedom. Let's see which matters more. That was the weapon she was using. Corveth couldn't back down without looking weak in front of his supporters. And she was betting he was too arrogant to believe an Omega could actually beat him. Very well, he said. But when I break you, remember you asked for this. They cleared a space in the center of the hall. Corvetha's supporters ringed the area, eager to watch their leader remind this upstart Omega of her place. Brienne pushed down the fear trying to claw up her throat. Corveth was 3 times her age, with centuries of combat experience. But she'd learned from the best. Fenria's voice echoed in her memory. Use their expectations. Turn their strength into weakness. They began. Corveth was fast despite his age, powerful despite his years. His first strike would have taken her head off if she hadn't ducked. She rolled, came up behind him, landed a kick to his kidney that barely made him grunt. This wasn't like the courtyard fight with the 12 warriors. This was an elder alpha who'd survived 300 years of combat. Every move was efficient, economical, deadly. But Brienne had something he didn't. She had fury. Pure, distilled rage at every Omega who'd died thinking they were worthless. Every wolf who'd scrubbed floors and broken their backs and believed the lies. She fought like water finding cracks in stone. Slipping through his defenses. Landing strikes where he didn't expect them. Using his size and strength against him. 5 minutes in, Corveth was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Nothing major, but humiliating. Being marked by an Omega. Stand still and fight, he roared. But, so you can use your strength advantage. She danced back. That's the problem with the old ways, Corveth. They only work when everyone agrees to play by your rules. He charged, massive and furious. She sidestepped, grabbed his arm as he passed, used his momentum to send him crashing into the wall. He rose slowly, blood running from a split lip. I underestimated you. Everyone does. She settled into a fighting stance. It's my greatest advantage. The second round was different. Corveth fought smart now, carefully, using his experience. He wouldn't fall for the same tricks twice. They circled each other, trading blows, neither gaining clear advantage. Brienne's ribs ached. Her shoulder throbbed where his claws had connected. But she could see he was tiring too. Age catching up to him. Finally, she saw her opening. He overcommitted to a strike, left his right side exposed for just a heartbeat. She drove her fist into his solar plexus, followed with an elbow to his jaw, swept his legs, and had him pinned before he could recover. "Yield," she said, forearm across his throat. The hall was silent. Corveth stared up at her, pride and shame warring in his eyes. "You fight well. For an Omega." "I fight well for a wolf," she corrected. "That's the whole point." She released him, stepped back, offered a hand. After a long moment, he took it. Let her help him up. "I've spent 300 years believing certain things," he said quietly. "Not easy to let them go. No one's asking you to let go overnight." Brienne's voice gentled. "Just to consider the possibility that what you believed might be wrong. That maybe strength isn't about keeping others down. It's about lifting everyone up." Corveth looked around at his supporters. Saw the doubt on some faces. The conviction on others. The uncertainty everywhere. "I won't lie and say I suddenly believe in your new order," he said finally. "But I'm a wolf of honor. I made a deal. We'll disband. No rebellion." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." His expression hardened. "There are others who think like I do. Some won't be swayed by a single fight. This isn't over." "I know." Brienne met his eyes. "But maybe you can help convince them. Not because you believe, but because you're curious. Because you want to see if this impossible thing might actually work." "Maybe," he conceded. "Or maybe I just want to watch it fail from the inside. Either way, you'll be watching. That's a start." News of the fight spread through the compound like wildfire. The Kingbreaker had faced down a rebellion with nothing but fists and words. Corvetha's faction disbanded, though not all returned to full participation. Some left entirely. But the immediate crisis was averted. The council meeting that night was subdued. "We got lucky," Morgoth said. "If Corveth had won, or refused to honor the deal." "But he didn't," Brienne interrupted. "And now we know something important. The traditionalists will test us. Push boundaries. We need to be ready." "Ready how?" Sulian asked. "We can't keep sending you to fight everyone who disagrees with our policies." "No, but we can show them success. More mixed units. More integrated projects. Proof that this new system works better than the old one." She leaned forward. "People don't change because you tell them to. They change because they see something better and want to be part of it." "Inspirational," one of the council members said dryly. "Also naive. Some wolves will never accept these changes. Then they'll be left behind." Brienne's voice turned hard. "We're not going back. Not to the old ways, not to the old hierarchies. The kingdom evolves or it dies. There's no third option." The year turned, winter giving way to spring. The kingdom settled into its new patterns, though tensions remained. Brienne threw herself into council work, mediating disputes, implementing reforms, trying to build something that would last beyond the initial enthusiasm. She also trained. Every morning before dawn, she met with Fenria in the old training grounds. The ancient teacher pushed her harder than ever. "Why?" Brienne asked one morning after a particularly brutal session. "I can already beat most fighters in the compound. What are you preparing me for?" "For what comes next," Fenria replied cryptically. "Power draws challenges like blood draws predators. The stronger you become, the more wolves will want to test you." She was right. Over the following months, Brienne faced 7 challenges. Warriors who thought an Omega on the council was an insult. Traditionalists who wanted to prove the old ways were superior. Even a few freed Omegas who resented her success. She won every fight. With each victory, her reputation grew. The Kingbreaker. The Omega who wasn't. The wolf who changed everything. The titles piled up until she barely recognized the frightened girl who'd once scrubbed floors. But success brought complications. "People are starting to see you as more than a council member," Dravan said one evening. They'd fallen into a routine of evening walks, discussing the day's challenges. Some of Morgatha's wolves are calling you the 8th council member. The tiebreaker who's become more influential than the other 7 combined. That's not what I want. Doesn't matter. It's what you're becoming. He stopped walking, turned to face her. You need to decide, Brienne. Are you content being the bridge? The mediator? Or do you want to actually lead? I don't want to lead. I just want things to be better. Those aren't mutually exclusive. His expression was serious. The kingdom is changing, but it needs direction. Vision. Right now, you're reacting to problems as they arise. What if you started shaping the future instead? The question haunted her for days. She found herself walking through the Omega quarters one afternoon, though they weren't called that anymore. Just the Eastern Housing District. But the wolves who lived there were still mostly former Omegas, still finding their footing in a world that had changed almost overnight. Tasman found her there, surrounded by children who'd been born into the new order. They don't understand what it was like before, Tasman said, watching the children play. To them, this is normal. Natural. They'll grow up thinking Omegas was just a word, not a life sentence. That's good, Brienne said. It's also dangerous. Tasman's voice dropped. Because if we forget how bad it was, we might let it come back. Different words, same system. Not if we build something strong enough to last. And how do we do that? Brienne didn't have an answer. She found Sulien that evening in his study, surrounded by old texts. He looked every one of his 400 years. Can I ask you something? She said from the doorway. Of course. How did you stay king for 3 centuries without losing yourself? He set down his book. Who says I didn't? What? I've been king since I was 23 years old. I've made decisions that saved thousands and killed thousands more. I've enforced laws I hated and changed laws that were working. I've watched everyone I loved die while I kept living. The wolf I was at 23 would be horrified by what I've become. So you did lose yourself. No, he corrected gently. I changed. Evolved. Became what the kingdom needed, even when it cost me everything I wanted to be. He stood, moved to the window. You're asking because you feel yourself changing. Becoming something you never wanted to be. How did you know? Because I've watched every leader in history go through the same transformation. The moment they realize power isn't a tool they use. It's a weight they carry. And once you pick it up, you can never fully put it down. I don't want power. Yes, you do. You just don't want to want it. He smiled sadly. That's what makes you dangerous, Brienne. Truly dangerous. Because you're not seeking power for yourself. You're accumulating it almost by accident, through sheer competence and conviction. That's the kind of power that reshapes kingdoms. What if I'm not ready? No one ever is. He placed a hand on her shoulder. But you'll learn. Or you'll break. Either way, the kingdom will keep changing. The only question is whether you'll shape that change or let it shape you. That night, Brienne couldn't sleep. She stood on the ramparts again, watching the moon and thinking about everything Sulien had said. About power and change and the wolf she was becoming. Draven found her there, as he often did. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much thinking. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. I'm falling in love with you, Draven said suddenly. Brienne's breath caught. What? I'm falling in love with you, he repeated. Have been for months. Just thought you should know. Draven, she struggled for words. I'm not. I can't. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. You're focused on the kingdom. On building something that lasts. I understand that. But I also know that someday, when things settle, you'll want more than council meetings and political compromises. And when that day comes... He turned to face her fully. I want you to know I'll be waiting. He left before she could respond. Brienne stood alone on the ramparts, heart hammering, and felt something shift in her chest. For 8 months, she'd been the Kingbreaker. The freed Omega. The bridge between factions. She'd been a symbol, a weapon, a political tool. But Draven saw her as just Brienne. A wolf who might want love and companionship and a life beyond revolution. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. 3 months passed. The kingdom continued its awkward evolution, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. More mixed units. More integrated training. More wolves accepting that the old ways were truly gone. But acceptance came at a price. The traditionalists who'd left formed their own pack in the Western territories. They called themselves the Pure Bloods, and their message was simple. The new order was a betrayal of everything wolves had built over millennia. Their recruiting, Auric reported in a council meeting. Former warriors, disgruntled betas, even some freed omegas who missed the simplicity of knowing their place. How many? Morgoth asked. Maybe 500. Could be more. Sulien's expression darkened. Corveth. Leading them. He honored his word about disbanding his rebellion. He never promised not to leave and start something new. Brienne felt sick. She'd beaten Corveth, thought she'd convinced him to at least try accepting change. Instead, she'd driven him to create an alternative. This is my fault, she said quietly. This was inevitable, Sulien corrected. The moment we abolished ranks, we created winners and losers. Those who lost status were always going to push back. Corveth just gave them a figurehead. So what do we do? One of Morgoth's council members asked. They're on our borders. Growing stronger. Eventually, they'll become a threat. We negotiate, Brienne said immediately. With wolves who think our entire system is an abomination? Dravan shook his head. That's naive. It's necessary. We can't go to war with our own people. That defeats everything we're trying to build. The council debated for hours. Finally, they agreed. Brienne would lead a delegation to meet with Corveth. Try to find common ground, or at least peaceful coexistence. The Pure Blood settlement looked disturbingly like old Shadowcrest. Rigid hierarchy. Omegas serving higher ranks. Warriors training in traditional formations. Corveth had recreated the past. He received them in a war hall that emphasized his authority. The Kingbreaker, he said. No warmth in his voice. Come to tell me I'm wrong again? No, come to ask if we can find a way forward, Brienne replied, keeping her voice steady. You've built something here. I respect that. But how long before this becomes a real conflict? Corveth leaned back in his chair. That depends on you. Leave us alone, let us live by the old ways, and there's no problem. Keep trying to force your revolution on wolves who don't want it, and yes, eventually we'll fight. We're not forcing anything. Wolves can choose. Can they? He gestured around the hall. Half the wolves here came because they were ostracized in your new order. Mocked for wanting traditional structure. Told they were wrong for believing in hierarchy. You claim to offer freedom, but only if wolves think like you do. The words stung because they held truth. Brienne had seen it herself. Former alphas struggling to find purpose without rank. Betas who'd built entire identities around their position, now adrift. You're right, she admitted. We've made mistakes. Pushed too hard in some places. But splitting into separate packs isn't the answer. We'll end up as enemies. Perhaps we already are. Dravan stepped forward. Then let's define the terms. Clear boundaries. Trade agreements. Non-aggression treaties. You live your way, we live ours. Corveth studied him. And when our young wolves see yours training together, Omega and Warrior side by side. When they start asking questions we can't answer without sounding like tyrants. Your very existence threatens what we're building. Then you're building on sand, Brienne said quietly. If your system only works when wolves don't see alternatives, it's already failed. Or yours has. Corveth stood. I'll make you an offer. 1 year. You stay on your side of the western border, we stay on ours. No contact, no trade, no interference. After 1 year, we compare. See which kingdom is stronger, more stable, happier. Let results speak. And then we talk again. As equals. Not as rebels and revolutionaries, but as 2 viable systems. Maybe we find a way to coexist. Maybe one of us admits we were wrong. His smile was bitter. Or maybe we fight the war we both know is coming. The delegation returned to Shadowcrest with the treaty. The council debated its merits for 3 days. It's a trap, one member argued. Give them a year to build up forces, perfect their propaganda. When the deadline comes, they'll be stronger than ever. It's also an opportunity, Morgoth countered. A year to prove our system works. To show that equality and merit produce better results than hierarchy and tradition. Sulien had been quiet through most of the debate. Finally he spoke. I've lived long enough to know that you can't force change on wolves who aren't ready. Corveth is right about one thing. We did push hard. Some wolves needed more time. So we just let them recreate the old systems? Brienne couldn't keep the frustration from her voice. Let them keep Omegas as servants? We let them choose, Sulien said firmly. If those Omegas want to leave, we welcome them. If they want to stay, that's their choice too. Freedom means accepting that some wolves will choose things we disagree with. The treaty was signed. 1 year of separation. 1 year to prove which vision of the kingdom would endure. Brienne threw herself into making sure theirs succeeded. She helped establish schools that taught more than just combat. Created systems for wolves to find purpose beyond rank. Implemented councils at every level so decisions came from many voices, not just the elite. But she also watched wolves struggle with the changes. The beta who'd spent 30 years as a respected craftsman, now competing with former Omegas who learned faster. The warrior who'd built his identity on being stronger, watching smaller wolves outthink him tactically. Change has casualties, Fenrir told her one evening. You can't rebuild a kingdom without some wolves feeling lost. How do we help them? By being patient. By remembering that tearing down old structures is fast. Building new ones takes time. The ancient woman studied her. You're exhausted, child. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Brienne couldn't remember. That night, Dravan found her in the training grounds, working through forms in the moonlight. You're avoiding me, he said. I'm avoiding everyone. Because I told you I loved you. It wasn't a question. Because I don't know what to do with that. She lowered her practice blade. Everything in my life is about the kingdom. About proving this works. I don't have room for anything else. I'm not asking for room. I'm asking if, someday, you might want it. He stepped closer. You're allowed to be more than the kingbreaker, Brienne. You're allowed to just be a wolf who wants connection. What if I'm not? What if I gave up that part of myself when I became this? She gestured vaguely at herself. Then I'll wait until you find it again. His smile was gentle. I'm patient. And you're worth waiting for. He left her alone with her thoughts and her doubts. The months passed. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter. The deadline approached. Reports from the purebloods' territory were mixed. They'd built a stable, orderly society. Crime was low. Wolves knew their roles. Production was efficient. But they'd also expelled 3 Omegas who questioned the hierarchy, and rumors spoke of harsh punishments for dissent. Meanwhile, Shadowcrest's new order showed its own problems and triumphs. Innovation thrived when wolves from different backgrounds collaborated. But so did conflict when old prejudices surfaced. They'd had 2 serious fights, one resulting in a death that shook the compound for weeks. Neither system is perfect, Brienne told the council as the year's end approached. That's what we need to accept. So we admit defeat? Morgoth demanded. We admit reality. There's no perfect kingdom. Only the one we keep trying to improve. The meeting with Corveth happened at the border, exactly 1 year after the treaty. Both leaders brought small delegations. Tension crackled in the air. Well, Corveth asked, ready to admit the old ways work better? Ready to admit that better depends on what you value, Brienne replied. You've built stability. We've built innovation. You've created order. We've created opportunity. Both have merit. Both have flaws. So we agree to disagree? Continue this separation forever? Or we find a third option. She'd spent weeks working on this proposal with the council. Limited integration. Trade between our territories. Wolves can choose which system they prefer, move between them freely. We stop seeing each other as threats and start seeing each other as different approaches to the same goal. Which is building a kingdom where wolves can thrive. However they define that. Corveth was quiet for a long moment. You're suggesting we formalize the division. 2 kingdoms under one banner. A federation, Su Lian added. You govern your territory by traditional law. We govern ours by council. We share defense, trade, basic rights. But day-to-day governance stays local. That could work, Corveth said slowly. Or it could be the beginning of permanent civil war. Only if we let it be. Brienne met his eyes. A year ago, I beat you in a fight. Humiliated you in front of your supporters. You could hate me for that. Instead, you built something. Proved your system could work. That takes strength. Don't patronize me, girl. I'm not. I'm offering respect. You believe in your way. I believe in mine. Maybe we're both right. Maybe wolves need both options. The treaty that emerged took 3 weeks to negotiate. 2 territories, 2 systems, 1 kingdom. Wolves could migrate between them freely. Trade would be encouraged. Defense would be coordinated. And every 5 years, both sides would meet to reassess and renegotiate. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. The night the treaty was ratified, Brienne stood on the ramparts one last time as the wolf she'd been. Tomorrow, she'd announce her resignation from the council. You're really leaving? Dravan asked, joining her. The kingdom doesn't need me anymore. It needs to prove it can function without the Kingbreaker. She smiled at his expression. I'm not disappearing. Just stepping back. Let someone else carry the weight for a while. What will you do? Travel. See the territories I helped reshape. Maybe figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for revolution. She turned to face him. And maybe, if you're still willing to wait, figure out who I could be with someone who sees me as just Brienne. His smile was brilliant. I told you I was patient. But, because I'm terribly broken at getting this part right. Lucky for you, I specialize in complicated. He took her hand. The kingdom will be here when you're ready to come back. And so will I. Brienne looked out over the compound one last time. Lights flickered in windows where wolves of all former ranks lived and worked and loved. The kingdom she'd helped break and rebuild. Imperfect, struggling, but alive with possibility. She'd been a discarded Omega. A weapon forged in anger. A revolutionary who'd changed everything. But tomorrow, she'd start learning to be something simpler and infinitely more complicated. Just a wolf, trying to figure out how to live in the world she'd made. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed to be. 5 years later, Brienne stood in the council chamber again, but this time as an advisor, not a member. The kingdom had evolved beyond what anyone could have predicted. The Federation held, though not without tension. Wolves moved freely between traditional and reformed territories. Some thrived in structure, others in innovation. Most found their own path between extremes. Corveth had died the previous winter, old age finally claiming him. His successor was younger, more willing to experiment with modified hierarchies that gave Omegas more choice while maintaining some traditional structure. It wasn't what Brienne would have chosen, but it worked for them. Su Lian had stepped down from active governance 2 years ago, though his council was still sought on difficult matters. Morgoth led the reformed territories with energy and vision, though he'd learned to temper his revolutionary zeal with pragmatism. And Brienne? She'd found something she'd never expected. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose without desperation. She trained new warriors, advised on complex disputes, and lived a life that was finally, completely her own. Ready? Dravan asked, offering his arm. As I'll ever be. They walked together through the compound to the ceremony grounds where wolves from both territories gathered. Today marked the 5th-year reassessment, and both sides had agreed to expand the Federation's charter, include more cooperative programs. Progress, slow and imperfect, but real. Tasman met them at the entrance, now a senior instructor at the integrated school. Never thought I'd see this day. Traditionalists and reformers actually choosing to work together. Don't jinx it, Brienne said, but she was smiling. The ceremony was simple but profound. Leaders from both territories stood together, pledging continued cooperation. Young wolves who'd grown up in the Federation watched. For them this was normal. The old wars, the old hierarchies were just stories. As the sun set over the compound, Brienne stood with Dravan, watching wolves mingle regardless of origin or former rank. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. Everything you sacrificed to make this happen? She thought about the Omega she'd been, the weapon she'd become, the leader she'd never wanted to be, the wolf she was still learning to accept. Ask me again in another 5 years, she said. But right now? It was worth it. He squeezed her hand, and together they watched the kingdom they'd helped build stumble forward into its imperfect, impossible future. The end.